Learning English doesn't have to be boring. In fact, it can be an adventure. When you follow a story in English, your brain naturally learns grammar, vocabulary, and structure without even realizing it. That's the power of storytelling. So if you want to improve your English in the most enjoyable way possible, hit the like button, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss tomorrow's episode. Now, let's begin today's story. The air felt fresh that morning in Sidney. The sun had already risen behind the tall buildings, sending soft orange light across the harbor. Michael stood outside his hotel, feeling the light breeze brush against his face. He wasn't in a hurry. It was a day for walking, for exploring, for noticing things that usually go unseen. Michael had arrived in Sydney 2 days earlier. He was from Boston, and this was his first time in Australia. He had read a lot about the city, about the Opera House, the Harbour Bridge, the beaches, but he wanted to experience it all for himself. No guidebook, no plans. Just walking and seeing what the day would offer. He started his walk in the circular quay area. Ferries came and went, bringing people to work or to the small islands nearby. Tourists took photos and workers in suits walked quickly toward their offices. But Michael moved slowly. He looked at the buildings, the signs, the seagulls floating in the air. A street musician played a soft tune on a guitar nearby, and the sound followed him as he turned toward the narrow streets of the rocks. This area felt older, with stone buildings and narrow pathways. Michael could imagine what it looked like 100 years ago. Some walls still showed the marks of time, cracks in the stone, faded paint, windows with small glass squares. A cafe opened its windows and let out the smell of fresh bread and coffee. Michael didn't stop to eat. He had eaten earlier, and now he wanted to keep walking. As he passed a quiet alley, something caught his eye. There was a mural on the wall, colors and shapes showing the city in a dreamlike way. But what made it interesting wasn't just the painting. It was the shadow. The morning light hit a wire sculpture above the mural, and the shadow it made looked like a giant bird flying over the city. Michael paused and looked up. The sculpture was simple, just a few thin metal rods twisted into the shape of wings, but the shadow it made was powerful. It seemed alive. A woman walked past him and looked up too. She smiled but said nothing. Michael smiled back. Some moments needed no words. He continued walking, now more aware of the light around him. The sun had risen higher and the city had become warmer. He reached a small park near the edge of the harbor. Families sat on the grass, and children played near a water fountain. He found an empty bench and sat down for a few minutes, just watching. The sound of laughter, the hum of traffic, the soft waves against the rocks, it all blended into something peaceful. After a short rest, Michael stood and walked toward the Opera House. From a distance it looked smooth and white, like sails frozen in the wind. But as he got closer he noticed the texture. The surface wasn't plain. It was made of tiny tiles, cream and gray, arranged in careful patterns. He hadn't expected that. From photos, the Opera House looked simple. In person it was more detailed, more interesting. He walked slowly around the building, watching tourists take selfies, children climb the steps, and performers carry instruments inside. A man sat on the steps, sketching the building in a notebook. Michael looked over his shoulder for a moment. The drawing was rough but full of energy. He thought about how everyone sees the same place in a different way. Feeling curious, Michael turned away from the harbor and headed into the city center. The streets became louder, more crowded. People talked on phones, buses rolled by, and signs flashed with colorful lights. But even in the middle of the noise, Michael kept noticing small details: a flower growing between cracks in the sidewalk, a street sign shaped like a boomerang, a group of people playing chess in front of a bookstore. At one corner, he saw a man selling old maps and postcards. Michael stopped to look. One postcard showed Sidney in the year 1968. The opera house was only half built. He bought it and put it in his backpack. It felt like a little piece of time. As the day grew warmer, Michael reached Hyde Park. It was larger than he expected. Tall trees offered shade, and fountains sparkled in the sunlight. A long path ran through the middle with benches on both sides. He walked slowly under the trees, listening to the birds and the distant sound of music from a nearby event. In the center of the park stood a tall structure, the Anzac Memorial. Its design was modern but strong and respectful. Michael stood at the entrance and read the signs about the soldiers it honored. He didn't know much about Australian history, but something about the place made him pause. He stood silently for a moment, then moved on. At the far end of the park, he saw an art installation, colorful umbrellas hanging between trees like floating flowers. Children ran underneath them, laughing. Michael smiled and took a photo, not just of the umbrellas, but of the feeling they created. The afternoon sun was beginning to lower. The shadows grew longer. Michael checked the time. He had been walking for hours, but he didn't feel tired. If anything, he felt more alive than ever. Sidney had shown him something he didn't expect, not just sights, but feelings. A quiet moment with a sculpture, a shadow on a wall, the sound of water in a park. He hadn't gone to the famous beaches yet. He hadn't climbed the bridge. But somehow it didn't matter. The city had already welcomed him in its own gentle way. And he knew something else, the walk wasn't over yet. Michael crossed a street lined with jacaranda trees, their purple flowers falling gently onto the sidewalk. The colors gave the road a dreamlike atmosphere. He didn't rush. His steps remained slow and thoughtful, as if each one could bring something new to notice. A tram rolled past him, almost silent except for the soft hum of the tracks. Inside, people stared at their phones or looked out the window. Michael thought about joining them, but then he looked down another street and decided to continue on foot. Sidney had more secrets to show him, and he wanted to find them the natural way, one step at a time. He passed a row of bookshops and antique stores. One of them had a wooden sign that read "Time Traveler's Welcome." The windows were full of strange items, typewriters, globes, a pair of old binoculars, and a small, faded teddy bear with one eye missing. Michael paused outside, looking at the display. It made him feel nostalgic, even for things he had never experienced. That was one of the things he liked most about walking in new places, the unexpected emotions that could rise up from the smallest objects. A little further down the street, he reached Darling Harbor. The view opened up suddenly, water sparkling, boats tied to floating docks, and restaurants lined along the edge. People walked in groups, holding hands or pushing strollers. There was laughter, clinking glasses, the smell of grilled food. It felt like a celebration of ordinary life. Michael stopped at a railing and leaned forward. The water reflected the shapes of nearby buildings and clouds that moved slowly above. A ferry arrived, and its motion sent ripples through the reflections, distorting the sky and the water. He watched until the surface became still again. On the other side of the harbor, there was a footbridge with curved metal rails and hanging flower baskets. Michael decided to cross it. The bridge gave him a wide view of the whole harbor, from the tall office towers to the low wooden piers. From up there, he noticed something that surprised him, a group of people sitting on the edge of the water, painting on small canvases. Some were students, others looked older, but they all focused deeply on the colors in front of them. The scene inspired Michael to reach for his notebook. He had brought it on the trip but hadn't used it yet. He found a spot on the other side of the bridge, sat on a bench, and began to write. Not a long story, not a diary entry, just a few lines about what he was seeing. The act of writing made the moment feel more real. When he finished, he looked up and noticed the shadows had changed again. The sun was now on the other side of the sky. Afternoon had quietly turned toward evening. But Michael wasn't finished walking. He made his way toward Chinatown. The change in atmosphere was immediate. Bright red lanterns hung above the streets, shop signs were written in different languages, and the smell of spices filled the air. There was a kind of rhythm here, not in the form of music, but in the movement of people, the patterns of light, the way steam rose from food stalls. He passed a small temple tucked between two modern buildings. Its door was open, and inside, incense smoke floated toward the ceiling. Michael stood at the entrance, not going in, but taking in the contrast. He respected the quiet energy of the place. Further down the road, he found a narrow alley filled with murals, dragons, clouds, flowers, and people painted in styles that mixed tradition and street art. Each wall told a different story. He took his time, walking slowly from one end of the alley to the other. A cat appeared from behind a trash bin and crossed in front of him without a sound. The moment felt like something out of a movie. From Chinatown, he turned toward Permont, a neighborhood he had read about but never seen. The streets were quieter now, more residential. Trees lined the sidewalks and small cafes were beginning to close for the day. He passed a bakery where the last loaves of bread were being taken from the oven. The smell reminded him that he hadn't eaten since morning. He stopped at a corner cafe, ordered a simple sandwich and tea, and sat at a table near the window. The place was calm. Soft music played in the background, and a couple near him whispered over a map. A single candle burned on each table, though it wasn't fully dark yet. The light gave the room a warm, peaceful feeling. As he ate, Michael thought about the things he had seen during the day. None of them had been dramatic. There were no accidents, no surprises, no big adventures. But still, the day had felt full. Full of meaning, full of movement, full of quiet discoveries. He finished his meal, left a small tip on the table, and stepped back outside. The sky had changed again, now deep blue, with the first stars beginning to show. Street lamps flickered on one by one, and the city took on a different personality. It was no longer a place of rushing workers and noisy traffic. It had become softer, almost secretive, as if holding stories only visible after sunset. Michael walked slowly back toward the water. The buildings now reflected golden lights, and the surface of the harbor seemed darker, more mysterious. He stood at the same railing where he had watched the ferry earlier. The water was calmer now, but still alive with small ripples and glowing reflections. He took out the postcard he had bought earlier, the one showing Sidney in the late 60s. He held it up and compared it to the view in front of him. So much had changed. But somehow the soul of the place remained. The same curiosity, the same feeling of openness. He turned the postcard over and began to write a message on the back. Not to send, just to keep. A memory in words. As the night deepened, he made his way back toward his hotel. He passed streets he now recognized, cafes he had seen in the morning, lights that had changed color. The city wasn't new anymore. It was becoming familiar. And even though he was almost home for the night, he knew one thing for sure: his walk in Sidney wasn't finished yet. As Michael returned to the hotel, the sounds of the city changed. The streets were quieter now, but not silent. A soft hum remained, the quiet talk of people walking home, the distant sound of a guitar played by someone sitting under a street lamp, the gentle splash of water from the harbor behind him. He stopped to tie his shoe near a corner store and saw his own reflection in the dark glass window. He looked different somehow. Not because of his clothes or his hair, but because of something in his eyes, something softer, maybe more curious. Instead of going straight back, Michael turned down another street. This one was older, with cobblestones and buildings made of brick and stone. A small sign at the entrance called it The Rocks. He had heard about this area. It was one of the oldest parts of Sidney. Even at night, the place felt alive. Not with crowds or traffic, but with history. The walls seemed to hold memories, and every step sounded louder against the old ground. He followed the path through the quiet alleyways, past shops that had closed for the evening, and under hanging lights that gave everything a golden glow. He came to a small courtyard where a tree stood in the center. Fairy lights were wrapped around its branches, and nearby was a bench shaped like a wave. Michael sat down, resting his legs, and listened to the night. Above him, a few leaves rustled gently in the wind. Across the courtyard, a couple walked hand in hand, whispering and smiling. Their moment felt private, but also shared with the quiet beauty of the place. Michael didn't take a photo. He didn't need to. He knew the memory would stay with him longer than a picture. From there, he followed signs toward the harbor again. This time, he found himself facing the opera house, its white sails glowing softly under the moonlight. The building looked even more magical at night. Fewer people were around, and the area felt peaceful. Michael walked to the edge and looked out over the dark water. Then, something unexpected happened. A man walked up beside him holding a fishing rod. He nodded politely, then cast his line into the water without a word. Michael watched as the line disappeared into the darkness. The man didn't seem to care whether he caught anything. He just stood there calm, content. Michael smiled to himself. Sometimes it wasn't about the result. It was about the action, the doing. Like walking or riding or just paying attention. After a while, he walked again. He passed the famous harbor bridge, massive and still, like a sleeping giant over the water. Its lights twinkled gently, and cars moved quietly across it. Michael had planned to walk over the bridge the next day, but now he wondered if this view from below might be better. He crossed into a quiet neighborhood on the other side. There were tall palm trees and wide sidewalks. At a small corner park, he saw a group of teenagers sitting in a circle, playing soft music from a speaker. They were laughing, relaxed. Michael kept walking, but the sound of their voices followed him for a few steps. It made him think of his own teenage years, when the world felt like a question waiting to be answered. Eventually, he reached a lookout point. The city stretched before him, its towers, streets, lights, and quiet corners all visible at once. From up there, Sidney looked both big and small. A living map of everything he had seen that day. He stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, feeling the wind on his face. He thought about how the day had started with no plan except to walk. And now, after many hours and many steps, he had discovered a whole new world, just by paying attention. The night grew cooler. The stars shone more clearly. Michael checked the time, not with his phone, but by looking at the sky. It was late, though he didn't feel tired. Finally, he turned back toward his hotel. The walk home felt different now. He walked more slowly, as if not wanting the day to end. Every corner he passed seemed familiar. Every shop, every tree, every light had become part of his experience. When he reached the hotel, he stood at the door for a moment. Behind him, the city breathed. It didn't sleep, not really. It just changed rhythm. In his room, he dropped his backpack, washed his face, and sat by the window. He opened his notebook and wrote again. This time, not just lines, but full sentences. He described the sounds, the lights, the small surprises. He didn't write everything, just enough to remember how it felt. When he finished, he leaned back and looked at the ceiling. His body was tired, but his mind felt calm. He thought about how many other cities in the world were waiting. But for now, he felt deeply thankful for this one day in Sidney. He turned off the light, but the glow from outside still reached through the curtains. The city was still there. And it would still be there tomorrow. Before you go, remember this. Through this simple story, you've just learned tons of real English expressions, natural sentence structures, and vocabulary without even noticing. That's the magic of storytelling. You've trained your ears and brain while enjoying a peaceful and emotional journey. If you enjoyed this kind of story and want to improve your English with more immersive learning, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a daily story. We have new stories every single day. Now, tell us in the comments, have you ever had a walk like Michael's? Where did it happen, and what did you discover? We'd love to hear your stories too. See you in the next one.